who can share are the speaker and you?
Just me, and I'll allow Angela to do it later on when we're set up to go.
Okay. So these are security precautions. I don't know if you've all been reading about what's it called? Zoom. Yeah, people crashing into Zoom.
Zoom
meetings.
bombing. It's called.
Yeah, Zoom bombing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here we go. Let's begin. So welcome everyone. This is the Bloomington Rotary Club's weekly celebration of service for April 7th, 2020. I'm the current club president, Aaron Davis, and it is just wonderful to see everyone here, including numerous guests from outside the club and club members who haven't been here before. So I'd like to start now by asking Dick Rose to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and Dick will give a reflection afterwards.
Fine. Oh, there's the flag. Great. Well, join me, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good. Well, as a reflection, I actually want to have us reflect on what makes a community go. And the context for this is not only the virus, which is, of course, imposing extraordinary challenges on towns, large and small, throughout the globe, but the particular context is a book that I read. I was given it as a gift in late 2018, a December gift, read it about a year ago in 2019. It's a book that is called Out of Town. The subtitle is a 100,000 mile journey into the heart of America. And the journey was not like many that we've read about, like at least Heat Moon, which was by car, but this one was by private plane. The authors are Jim Fallows, one of my favorite writers. He's a frequent writer for The Atlantic. And this book is co-authored with his wife, Debbie. And I just show you this. This was the vehicle they flew in. They flew to something like 45 communities in 30 states over about a 5-year period of time. This is not a Piper Cub, as you can see. It's a very upscale, single-prop airplane. It's made in Duluth, Minnesota. Charlotte, others could be prideful over that. It's an extraordinary plane because it has a parachute that encases the whole plane and drops it to Earth safely in the case of some emergency. There's a solid rocket fuel propelled chute that comes out of the canopy, harnesses grab the plane, and so on.
Wow.
But over a 5-year period of time, Jim and Debbie Fallows visited these various communities. They ranged in size. Most of them were very small. That is on the size of Bloomington, 100,000 or less. Some of them as sparsely populated as 1,500 people in one main coastal community. What they were asking was basically what makes good communities thrive and what spells failure or a decline for a community. They quickly developed a routine. Jim would head for the local post office or the local newspaper office, try to get in contact with editors, local businessmen, and yes, service clubs occasionally. Debbie, meanwhile, would talk to the local librarians, visit the school superintendent, principals, teachers, meet with artists and musicians in the community, and together then they converse with townspeople in cafes, on streets, in parks, wherever they would find them. They visited each community 2 to 3 times, staying a few days each time, several different times of the year. So after this 5-year journey, how do the fellows actually describe a town that's doing well? They actually list a dozen plus one, a baker's dozen of characteristics. I'll only mention a couple of them. The first, and the interesting characteristic, it was listed first, is what people talk about when they're asked to describe their community. If they talk about national or global issues, the town is likely to be in decline. If, on the other hand, the residents talk about local issues that they can do something about, that community is cohesive and is probably on an upward swing. I'll just quote one sentence. The focus of discussion in successful towns was not on insoluble national divisions, but on practical local problems a community could address. So I imagine that if the fellows had brought their nice plane, this Cirrus plane, to the Monroe County Airport sometime during their 5-year journey and asked the mayor or downtown businessman or the Rotary Club what's on our mind, they would have heard a earful of local problems. Vendors at the farmer's market, construction of the 4th Street garage, the taxes imposed to pay for it, annexation efforts, what to do about the convention center, and on, all local issues, and all, in their opinion, a good sign. The fellows also asked who makes the town go? Who are the town spokespeople, the big important people? If residents could quickly answer that, and with some agreement, the town was doing well. If it was a dying community, as one newspaper editor himself had to put it, he said, well, I'll think about that overnight and get back to you. That's a bad sign. But again, Bloomington students and residents could and would answer this question without delay. And some of our fellow Rotarians and those we honor with our annual awards would surely be among those named. Another characteristic of successful cities that they have downtowns, and of course our city does, thanks to Bill Cook, Charlotte, and many others. And successful growing towns invest in the education of youth. Bloomington, of course, like other college towns, has the enormous advantages of a university. And IU drives much of our success as a city. But we also have Ivy Tech and innovative elementary and secondary schools, alternative schools for those who need them, and longstanding daycare facilities and even preschools. So amid the challenges of the coronavirus, we've all been inspired by stories of individuals within our communities who are helping one another. And I ask us to just reflect for a moment on what is happening now, this day, and over the last couple of weeks in Bloomington. I'll mention just a couple. Cardinal Spirits turns its distillery into making not spirits, but hand sanitizers that it's been donating. One World Catering no longer does catering and instead donates its foods to the food bank and delivering to families in need. Indeed, they've just expanded their service. My own Covenanter neighborhood is collecting household food for the community kitchen. And we read in the last few days, Shalom Center, Wheeler Mission, New Hope Family Shelter, working together with United Way and the city, has created an emergency quarantine facility for homeless that may have the virus. And we could all cite more examples. So I just leave you with that. Bloomington is and has been a great community, and the current pandemic has brought out the very best in us and in our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, IU Research Professor Dick Rose. Excellent. Okay, now I'd like to acknowledge our greeters for today, Michael Shermis, Katie Beck, and Jim Bright, and our production supervisor, Michael Shermis. Well done. Also, roundabout reporter for April, also the editor of the Roundabout, Judy Schroeder. And thanks to our Communications Committee co-chair, Alan Barker, for providing our club with this virtual Zoom opportunity to hold this gathering. And are there guests who have not yet been introduced? So I think we tried to introduce everybody as they come in, but I also see that Joy Harder is here. Shelley Yoder, Bill Murphy. Who else has not, of the 45, been welcomed yet?
Not about welcome, but Michael, Dick still has the marquee, if you will.
Right.
So that's probably a configuration thing. So you go back to Aaron so that Aaron will be displayed. There we go. Shifting around now with the speaker.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. It takes a team, right? So is there anyone else who hasn't been introduced? Jim Bright and Katie Beck, have you any people in mind who we haven't recognized yet?
Let us see who's joined us: 3 visiting Rotarians, past District Governor Terry Fry, Beverly Teach of Brown County, president of the Brown County Rotary Club, and Randy Wheeler is back with us from the Rotary Club of Evansville. Anybody else from visiting Rotarians? Okay, thank you, Aaron.
Okay.
And since we have someone from Evansville, this is Glenda Murray. Since we have someone from Evansville, could I just say, I know that they lost one of their longtime members, that Alan Winslow died last week at the age of 97, and he had been a Rotarian for many, many, many years, and an old friend of mine as well.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to recognize others who have signed in, who are here via phone or internet without video. We may not see you, but your engagement is deeply appreciated. The Rotary family this week, we have some birthdays. Martha Wales on April 8th, Gus Shackles, April 9th, and Megan Gearhart, a Rotaractor, April 9th also. And then Martha Foster, April 11th. And then membership anniversaries this week: Ron Barnes, 28 years in Rotary, 3 years with our club. There are always Rotarians in the news. Let's see, just checking with HT Bloom and other local media, including our Facebook page, which highlights a special reading by Trent Deckard. Also, there's a profile of Bill Oates from the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and an upcoming webinar featuring Scott Shackelford talking about his new book. So now we'd like to have Mike Baker give a brief announcement from the nominating committee of our club.
Hey, if anybody can hear me. This is Julia. I don't know what I'm doing. Sorry, Mike. I'll sign off now.
That's not a problem.
You don't have to sign off. Okay.
There we go. Well, I'm happy to announce the nominating committee has received a thumbs up from Sally Gaskell to be our president nominee for 21-22. She was on here a second. I can't see if she dropped off, but she's been involved in our club many years. Everybody knows her. I'm assuming that during her presidency, we'll probably hear more about baseball, and she might even talk a little bit about the arts. But I'm happy to announce that she's filled our slate now for 21-22. So congratulations, and thank you very much, Sally.
Yes, thank you, Sally. And now, Mike, if you could just move on into a Paul Harris Fellow induction.
Would be happy to. Most of you have heard this before, and you know that Paul Harris Fellow recognition is Rotary Foundation's way of expressing its appreciation for substantial contribution of both financial and community service activities. People who support the humanitarian and educational programs of Rotary, and it's named after our founder, Paul Harris, who started Rotary with 3 business friends in 1905. Although this person is relatively new to Rotary, her involvement in our club and community clearly demonstrates her shared purposes and ideals of Rotary and our club. During my Rotary year, I used to struggle a little bit, and I don't know why with her last name, but she finally got me over that. She's been involved in tree planting and just almost every activity, and she's even given us a big smile right now. But if I was at a podium, I'd say, Katie Cruikshank, would you please come on up, but just wave your hand, please. Katie has been involved since her first weeks in Rotary. She's been involved in doing all kinds of service activities for our club. She demonstrates that she's a perfect Rotarian. And as you know, a contribution to the Rotary Foundation and service in our community and club are investments in the ideal of goodwill, peace, and understanding. So today, our club has the honor of doing our first virtual Paul Harris Fellow, maybe the first virtual Paul Harris Fellow in the state, I'm not sure. But Jim will probably figure that out and let us know. Today, we do have the honor and pleasure of recognizing fellow Rotarian Katie Cruikshank, our first Zoom Paul Harris Fellow. Please accept our congratulations and sincere thanks. And would you all please join me in welcoming Katie.
Thank you, thank you.
And when we do meet in real time, we'll get to recognize you again publicly.
And here we have the certificate. Thank you, Kate Cruikshank. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You want to say a couple of words?
Well, I'm just really honored, I must say, and I guess I would like to say two things. First, I would like to thank Judy Schroeder for plunking me down on her porch swing and giving me a lecture on how important Rotary was and how it would enrich my life. I was a little hard to persuade, but she did it, and I'm very grateful to her. And my second thanks goes to the person we all thank for being so exemplary in public service and so many other ways, and her generosity is part of this, and that's Charlotte Zitlow. So thank you so much. I'm just so honored to be affiliated with all of you and with them in particular.
Thank you.
Am I supposed to pin myself?
If you will.
I practiced this. We'll see.
Don't hurt yourself.
I'm saving Mike this struggle of trying to get this into somebody else's clothes. There we go. I don't know if you can see it.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
I put mine on just so if I needed to drop it, I could.
I almost did, Mike.
And thank you, Kate, and thank you, Mike Baker.
Congratulations, Kate.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, thank you.
I'm proud of you.
Well, that means a great deal, I must say.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
Congrats, Kate.
Thank you, Joy.
Okay, moving forward with our Rotary Action updates, most of which will be in the roundabout. I'd like to just mention that last week's meeting was really extraordinary. 66 people in attendance, including Rotary International Director, our entire district governor line, including our own Lance Eberly, and all three of our Rotary Global Scholars, one from Japan and one from Germany. So these meetings are working so far, thanks to Alan and Michael Shermis and Katie. We're still operating, committees are still meeting, a scholarship committee is meeting for the current scholarship, high school scholarship program. You all have gotten statements for April through June, and thank you for your generosity. We're also on Thursday evening from 7 to 8:30, we'll have a Rotary Zoom Cafe again, where people can just drop in for however long they want and just chat, meet somebody, talk with a Rotarian that you maybe haven't gotten to know yet. And then, again, our praise for our first responders, hospital workers and police and food service workers, everybody who's doing the really hard work right now and taking some risks. So a lot of gratitude for them. Let's see, happy dollars. Does anyone have anything to be happy about today?
I do.
Yeah, speak out. Ashley.
Hello. I would like to report that we had the first ever successful District 6580 speech contest over Zoom on Saturday. We had 7 contestants and it was a lot of fun and everybody did a great job. We won't do it again, hopefully, but it went really well. And we had a standout winner that was a youth exchange student in the past. And I'm hoping to get her to speak to our club. So I'm very happy about the turnout there.
Thanks, Ashley. Who's next?
Can I do something for you? Can I just talk?
Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm happy to be on the corner of 6th and Morton on the 2nd floor, way above the social distance, and playing music for whoever walks by.
Oh, nice.
You can order the music. I've got everything. I've got jazz and classical and folk music. Just let me know what you'd like to hear. But whether you want to or not, there's music coming out of my balcony to the 6th and Morton.
All right, Charlotte, thank you.
Okay, good.
And Julia.
I'll get my money to you.
Okay. Yeah, we're focusing on the happy today. The dollars,
Yeah.
you know, put in the jar. And
Okay, well,
save
anyway, thank you.
up. Okay.
Good.
And I think that Julia was in line. Well, who
okay.
else?
Well, it's Julia, okay? And I'm just happy that I finally have done my first Zoom. Maybe Jay can hello. Maybe I can get some further instructions so I do this a little better, but it's wonderful to be back with my Rotary people again.
Thank you. Wonderful to have you back.
Aaron, it's
Yes.
Kate. It's Kate. I'm happy for obvious reasons to be a Paul Harris Fellow, but I also wanted to share something about Teachers Warehouse. One of our stronger volunteers, one of the ones who's more consistent, works in inventory, has set up a mask making operation in the workroom of Teachers Warehouse, since of course it's closed. And she has a whole team of people making masks. And those are, we're talking about just protective masks, and those are going out all over the county. They're churning out hundreds. So I just wanted to let you know that Teachers
Excellent.
Warehouse, though it is closed, is still deep into service.
Wonderful. That's
I
so
have
good.
a happy dollar comment. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Steve Engel, yes.
My wife Becky has helped organize this mask making effort, enlisting around 140 quilters from Bloomington. I probably think same effort that Kate's talking about. She got them enlisted a couple of weeks ago, I think, starting out, and they're doing some great work and some much needed work for particularly for the health workers at the hospital and so on. I'm proud of her. It's a great effort.
Okay, and I'm thankful for Ashley Sullivan,
Yes.
who is our president-elect and who did a great job, has done such a wonderful job, you know, with the four-way speech contest and so many other things. And July 7th, is that? You know, they're going to be our turnover. And the club is in such great shape with, you know, with Ashley and then, you know, after that, Sally. So I'm just delighted. So thank you, Ashley.
I wanted to say I'm happy for, I think I mentioned it before, but I'm getting happier about Zoom virtual dinners with family. So using the free Zoom for at least a 40-minute virtual dinner with family. That is, I'm happy because it's expanding geographically. I'm now having virtual dinner with family members that are not in Bloomington. And so it's starting to spread across family members that are geographically distributed. And that makes me happy because we're having virtual dinners with people we couldn't have had dinners with before in the family.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave Meyer. And Hal Turner.
Yes, I'm happy because despite the coronavirus attack on the entire country, there have been 0 fatalities on Monroe County residents so far. And to try to keep that as low as possible, I'm offering face shields for anyone who would like them. These are plastic clear face shields that have a thin plastic band that fits around the head, very lightweight, and there's no cost involved. So if you have an organization you think can use those to help keep more people healthy, send me a note, halturner12@gmail.com, and I will begin production on those. Right now I'm doing 100 for one organization in Bloomington, and I welcome any inquiries from any organization. There's no cost.
Thank you, Hal. Our early adopter of 3D printing really comes in handy. Thank you very much, Hal, for all your service work. Okay, and who is next? Hey, anyone else for Happy Dollars?
Aaron, this is Charlotte. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to do a second Happy Dollar because if you can see my face, I have a mask on because somebody just came to my door and handed me a new mask that she'd made. Adria's mother came by and just left me some masks. So people are really generous and thoughtful. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Did you hear me say that? I'm masked, so I'm probably not very audible.
Oh, no, it was loud and clear, Charlotte.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So we're very lucky. Yes, thank you.
Okay. And now, if we don't have anyone else jumping in, Owen Johnson will introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, President Aaron. Our speaker today grew up in southern Minnesota, then crossed the border to go to Iowa State, where she double majored in political science and Russian studies, and she was a distinguished military graduate. She has 2 master's degrees, one in organizational change from Hawaii Pacific, and one in political science from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla in Ukraine. She has served in the U.S. Army for 19 years. That includes 2 combat tours in Iraq, totaling 30 months. And most recently, she has been intelligence officer in a multinational corps in Poland and commander of an intelligence battalion supporting the U.S. Army Europe and the U.S. European Command. It's my pleasure to introduce to my fellow Rotarians, Lieutenant Colonel Angela Reber.
All right, can you all hear me? Okay, and can you see my screen? I shared it here for you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that, Owen, and all of you for this opportunity, though, for what you all just went through with your Happy Dollars. I don't know if I can top all the great work and the heroes that are here in Bloomington. You guys are doing outstanding work and really should be recognized. I appreciate that you recognize it amongst yourselves with everything that you are doing. Owen invited me to do this last fall, shortly after I arrived at Indiana University. And I attended with him 2 of your events to get to know you and your wonderful organization and understand what you are doing for this community in beautiful Bloomington. So I applaud you on all of that work. I'm here to share my experience and perspective with you from being in the Army for the last 19 plus years and really in Europe for the last 10 years, or in and out of Europe for the last 10 years. So here's my story. Several of you are probably wondering or ask why an Army War College fellow is at Indiana University. The War College, the Army in particular, but there's several war colleges, they're developing leaders for service at the strategic level. So I'm at that point in my life where I'm transitioning from that organizational, operational level to one of strategic leadership. And so this is a year that it was a new initiative between IU and the Army War College based on the Great Global and Language Program here at the Hamilton Luger School. And it's an opportunity to challenge my thinking, reflect, and study, but also to advance the knowledge of global application of land power, which is what the Army does, and influence within the region. I do want to give the disclaimer that the views expressed today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense, or the U.S. government in particular. But as I said, in that transition from the operational to the strategic way of thinking, I also know that our Army in this day and age is also working to remain ready. We're modernizing our military, and we're trying to stay competitive ahead of the challenging of the international order by really China and the world, and Russia and Europe particularly. And what we've seen is the U.S.-Russian relationship has moved from a balance of relations with cooperation in the 1990s and early 2000s to one of competition today. And we're trying to avoid conflict in the future that challenges America and NATO and our security, especially our economic and our political interests. So I do want to be in a place in my career where I can positively engage and help in the outcome in the 20 years next that follow. As I was talking to some individuals previously, I've always been interested in traveling. And so here's a map of Europe with all the highlights that you would see in Europe. I did attend school with another state that starts with I at Iowa State University. And while I was there, I became quite interested in the Russian culture. I knew I wanted to be an intelligence officer. I followed my brothers who had previously joined the Army, and I enrolled into ROTC. And so the first decade of my adult life in the Army, I briefly visited Russia and also Belarus, Minsk, Belarus. But shortly after I joined the Army, I was focused and deployed to Iraq. And so I spent several years in Iraq from 2003 to 2009. And then again, focused in the Middle East in 2012 and 2015. But for the last decade in particular, so since 2010, I've been focused in Europe. I lived 2 years in Ukraine, integrated within their population and their society. And then I transitioned to Poland for 2 years, and then to Germany for 2 years. And so I traveled during that time also through all of Europe, visiting well over 40 countries, including the Caucasus and Central Asia, or the former Soviet countries. And I was coordinating with our NATO allies and partners and focusing on the East European integration into Europe and helping to counter the Russian competition that we saw forming. Fortunately, that time though was flanked by my year in the Midwest. So I grew up first several, 20 years of my life living on my dad's family farm in Southwest Minnesota. And then when this opportunity came open last year, my husband and I were very happy to take advantage of it, living here in Bloomington, Indiana, and having the opportunity to come back to the Midwest and really get to understand again what the individuals who live here in the Midwest really are looking for and need as part of our efforts in the Army. When I look back at my history and where I set out to, I remember distinctly one day in 1999, my uncle asking me why I was studying Russian and why I was going to travel to Russia, because he had asked me in particular, wasn't the Cold War over? And for me at that young age, I felt, well, that's exactly why I'm going, because there's so much that we can gain from this relationship. But little did I know that, 20 years later, we would be in this, what we call strategic competition. Even though we've seen it developing over the last 10 or 15 years, but the question is, what will come in the next 10 years? From where, I've been focused, what we see is Moscow sees international relations as geopolitical competition between the great powers. And fortunately for us, we have, our great alliances that we rely on and partner with. And Moscow considers it necessary to expand its sphere of influence. In particular, they see their national interests are paramount with their regime's effectiveness and also the indispensability of the regime. And so they strive to maintain their influence within the regional order of East Europe in particular. And they try to assert their control over Georgia, what we've seen in Ukraine, and I think in the future, Belarus, as Belarus tries to really hold its sovereignty as a nation. I'll have a slide in here where I show what we've done partnering with NATO in Europe. We continue to position our forces in Poland and the Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. But as we do that, Belarus seems, is squeezed by Russia. And so the question really is, are we able to stop or change Russia's behavior? And if so, how? And are our current military efforts deterrence effective in that pursuit? As I said, I was commissioned in May of 2001. And so we all know where we were in September 9/11, on that day. And I found myself in September of 2001 at the U.S. Army's Military Intelligence Officers School shortly after I was commissioned. And at that time, we were still focused on learning about the Russian ground order battle. But while I was there, we quickly transitioned to the new threat that came. But shortly after I arrived, my first duty station was in Hawaii, which was a beautiful place to be located when you were 20-some years old. But then I had orders to go to Iraq, and I was on the advance party of the infantry brigade that I was assigned to at that time. And so I flew into Kirkuk with just 5 other people, and we were
Oh, we're having some.
the targeting. Oh, can you still hear me?
Now we can.
Great, go
Okay,
ahead,
sorry.
Angela, yes.
Okay. And I remember being in Iraq still in 2008 when Russia initiated its military activities against Georgia at that time. And really that was where I had focused on studying prior to joining the Army. And so in 2009, the Army had selected me for a program called the Olmstead Scholar program, where it was started by a general from World War II in the Korean War, General Olmstead, who was responsible for military foreign assistance and recovering the prisoners of war during that time. And he really saw the challenges that American military officers had in relating to their foreign counterparts in the civilian populations. So he established this opportunity for officers to acquire in-depth understanding of foreign cultures. And I was asked at that time to go to Ukraine and study Ukrainian and live immersed within the culture of Ukraine. And my husband came with me, and we had that unique opportunity to be completely immersed. Several of my peers who worked within the Department of Defense or Department of State were still focused on learning Russia, and there was still that dynamic within the country at that time. But I was integrated, having those conversations, really getting to learn the local perspective on the ground, assess and advise them, their discussions about what was important to their individual power structures, what they wanted, and then also the wider discussions as well, specifically missile defense going into Europe, European integration for Ukraine, were they going to go east or west? Could they stay in their non-block security, which is what they wanted? And then, advising them on what we thought, how we thought their security situation was with their neighbors, including Russia, about their army transformation and their lack of effort placed on the transformation of the Army. But during that time, from 2010 to 2012, I was also seeing what was going on again in the Middle East, and really seeing several of those countries on fire during that time. And so in 2012, the Army had me, I went back to the States, and I was focused in an intelligence element that we were supporting all of U.S. Central Command. So focused on the rise of the insurgency again in Iraq, and U.S. forces going back into Iraq in 2014, and trying to counter Iran in the resurgence we saw with the Iranian power in that area. But in 2015, I got a phone call from my assignment officer saying that she wanted me to go to Poland. And I was a little surprised because I knew what was going on in Ukraine. I had seen Ukraine kind of unfolding while I was focused back in the Middle East. And so as I asked her, well, where in Poland am I supposed to go? And she named the town, and she's like, I can't name it, but I'll spell it. And so she spelled it was Szczecin, Sczezecin. And so I had never really heard of that town before, but as she gave me a point of contact, and so I flew just a few weeks later to find some housing for my family. And when I had arrived in Berlin to take the train over the border, and a gentleman said, he didn't understand when I was saying Szczecin, but when he looked at me and said, you mean Stettin, it finally made sense to me on, Stettin was, that city that was actually the port city of Berlin. It was destroyed by the Allies in World War II. And when the Allies or the victors shifted the borders, it became part of Poland. And so it's a beautiful city that's right on the Baltic Sea of Poland. And in Poland, there is a multinational corps headquarters that I was assigned to. And the US in 2015 invested myself and about 14 other officers, including a US general, to this corps to help strengthen it as we were countering Russia in that shift as they were carrying out operations in Ukraine. And so we were assigned to help with the NATO and US security policy in Eastern Europe. And since 2016, the US Congress has provided funding for the European Deterrence Initiative to augment gaps in military aid for the security to our allies and partners. And this is to help with US capability in equipping disparities, as well as with our partners' equipment disparities. In particular, we were focused on strengthening the forces within Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, the Baltic countries, among the other NATO nations. And those countries in particular consistently invested at least 2% of their GDP towards their defense budgets. And in particular, we saw Poland as a regional leader within NATO's eastern flank that as a result of its efforts toward Russia, garnered additional US bilateral partnership and investment. And after my time in Poland, I was selected to command the intelligence battalion that's headquartered in Germany. And we were responsible for providing intelligence to all of US Army Europe, as well as US European Command, among some other headquarters stationed there for the Army. And during that time, I was connected significantly with the operational level of what was happening on the ground. Within our operations, we were focused on developing the threat throughout Europe, facilitating the joint threat assessments with our allies, and also conducting pilots of new technologies within that area. And so during this last decade, I've spent significant time in each of these countries during these critical moments, integrated with their citizens discussing life and their interests, and helping facilitate their transition, their development, and partnering with U.S. Military. Particularly in Ukraine in 2010, when they were discussing the integration between East or West and how they could try to maintain their sovereignty, when they were discussing the benefits and the risk of missile defense going into Europe, which we've now activated in both Poland and Romania, and then also being stationed in Poland during their transition to really counter the Russian threat that so many of those East European countries felt with the rise of the Russian transformation of their military and force to the international order. And then in Germany, where we really see the strengthening of our forces as we continue partnering in Europe. The next two slides I have are quite similar, but they show the threats to the Russian Federation based from the Russian perception. And the next slide is very similar, and it shows kind of what we term the Euro-Atlantic challenges. So Russia finds itself between EU and China, and they see both countries or both regions really expansionists against Russia in the political and economic sphere, and that's with the US in that transatlantic space. Russians' foreign and security policies are driven by the interests that the Kremlin sees in its threat perception, and particularly they want to halt NATO enlargement, and they want to restrict the exposure of the Russian society to the democratic political culture, and limit the activities of civil movements in the media, which is critical of the Russian regime. And so the additional threat that they see is the West's accompanying efforts to diminish Europe's reliance on the Russian energy markets, the prevention of Russia's military technical advance, and also undermining the Kremlin's regional and global leadership. And these all potentially cause Moscow to justify using its military as a tool to secure just beyond its borders, as we saw in Georgia that you see in the south, to Ukraine just to its west, and then just north of Ukraine, Belarus. In particular, these range rings that you can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen, perhaps not. In particular, these range rings signify some of the key weapon systems that Russia wants to in place or has in place to interlock what we call their anti-access area denial strategy, the A2AD strategy. And that's to help secure that strategic depth and defense to their nation that they see towards Europe in particular. Oops. And here's a similar slide that kind of shows that same structure, but it's the Euro-Atlantic challenges. So while I was in Poland and Germany in particular, we saw the increase of the migration throughout Europe that really came from the Middle East as a result of the situation in Syria and other countries. And with that also came the foreign fighter flow that included several bombings and terrorist attacks against the civilian populations within Europe, as well as military forces. And we started to see that change in the military balance and significant rise in different nuclear capability by Iran and also by Russia. And so today, what we see is Russia continues to seek to expand its influence in almost every region of the world. They're working to undermine the sovereignty of other states, particularly in what we term their near abroad. So in Georgia and Ukraine, and we expect to see in Belarus. They're working to weaken NATO and the EU, confront the policies of those organizations, and sow discord amongst the allies, as well as the US, to replace the international system, and then also to develop offensive capabilities of its armed forces and intelligence services. So in Europe, in many of the countries, we've seen Russia as an active participant in the domestic political process, and where they've also conducted, I would say, quite brazenly conducted gray zone tactics, which are in the cyber realm, and also we've seen poisonings and assassinations of dissidents and journalists in those countries as well. They remain in competition with the EU, and particularly they have developed ties with Serbia to try to counter the additional expansion of NATO with Montenegro and North Macedonia, which just became a NATO member. But they really have focused on those former Commonwealth of Independent States to maintain their area of influence. And that includes Ukraine, trying to put pressure on Ukraine, but we don't see any indications that Moscow will withdraw their forces of the Donbas region, or especially Crimea. In Moldova, just to the west of Ukraine, they have the area of the Transnistrian conflict remains, and that's an opportunity for Russia to maintain their long-term interests there. And then also in Georgia, where they continue to sustain constant tension in those occupied regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And it's beneficial for Russia to maintain that status quo in order to maintain leverage and prevent those areas from turning more towards Europe and towards the West. But they've also continued to consolidate their economic and security interests in the Arctic, for example. With the strategic shipping lanes, they want to ensure their long-term military dominance in that region. And then they've continued to expand their influence in the Middle East, North Africa, and South America as well. We saw in the Middle East, for example, they refused to blame Iran for the attacks on the Saudi Arabian oil infrastructure, but yet they offered to sell Riyadh air defense systems. And they did similar techniques in Turkey in the situation of the power vacuum when US forces withdrew there. And then we continue to see them provide military specialists in private military companies as security providers in both Central or in Africa as well as South America. This is a slide that just shows several of the initiatives that we worked with NATO to increase our forces in Europe, also just our presence. So with the initiating of the ballistic missile defense, increase of air policing, and other strategies that we've done to implement to work to counter Russia. And then really the question is, where does Belarus mean for Russia, and can our deterrence measures be effective in preventing Russia from doing military activities there? Moscow has failed the last 5 years to really gain that additional strategic success that they need in Belarus to interlock their A2AD strategy, that area, anti-access area denial strategy. And Russia would like to gain that in order to have the influence that they want. And so preventing Russia from gaining a further position in Europe, especially unrestrained access, is paramount. So really the experience, that I had, I've really seen that the US does have a vested interest in peace in Europe. In particular, our army and defense sector will see no growth in the years to come, but we need to remain nimble. And we should be committed with NATO to arms control in response to Russia. We need to rely on our allies. They do fill key critical gaps and are valuable, especially with the immeasurable benefit, which includes the sharing of intelligence, the information and technology that we work with them, and several other perspectives in cooperation in coordinating our efforts. And then we also do need to continue to invest in our partners and our allies, as seen in Ukraine and Georgia, and we should also look to Belarus in strengthening their culture and investing in their economy and people as well. I think we're unable to predict if Russia will abandon or modify its approach, but I do think as the US, we need to maintain our initiative in deterring offensively, and that means through diplomatic and non-military means, in trying to refuse Russia the strategic objective. And we've seen this demonstrated in Ukraine, and I think furthering it with the geostrategic success is important as we continue to weigh the risk versus the gain in Europe. And so, pending your questions, that's kind of the background I have on my experience.
Thank you, Angela, for a wonderful security briefing. Would you be able to stay after we close the meeting, because we only have a couple more minutes left to answer questions?
Yes, I would be.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. I don't know if you've heard the applause, but this was just wonderful. We'll hold off on questions until afterwards. Now,
Yeah,
we have the option to continue the recording or to stop recording before the question and answer. Do you have a preference?
No, I don't have a preference.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is, sort of take 2 minutes to wrap up the meeting and then move into the after program discussion. But thank you immensely for this presentation. So I'd like to, in terms of wrapping up, I want to honor well, in honor of today's celebration of service, President-elect Ashley Sullivan, do you have your the hat with you?
I'm ready to go.
All right. So please go ahead and make the drawing of one organization, a new organization, to receive a donation as part of our quarterly contribution to a local charity. Drum roll, please. And it is
Centerstone.
Centerstone. Wonderful. Okay, so Centerstone will be receiving the quarterly contribution starting today and throughout the quarter. Thanks, Ashley. Thought of the week. Well, our next celebration of service will be April 7th on Zoom again. Our speaker will be Penny Caudill of the Monroe County Health Department, speaking about current coronavirus concerns in Monroe County.
April 14th.
Oh, go ahead,
You
please.
said April 7th, it'll be April 14th.
Yeah, my programming is disrupted. The 14th. And thank you, Michael, for arranging that speaker. I think it will be of interest to all of us. Okay, the thought of the week is from Muhammad Ali. Don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. Now I'd like to share the four-way test of the things we think,
say, or do. Is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Fourth, will it be beneficial
To all concerned? And fifth,
is it fun?
Okay, and now for the after the program. Hello, Natalie. We will get back to some of the questions and answers.
Aaron, this is Kate.
Kate, hi.
Hi, I just had a comment for Angela. I think it's so important and so helpful for us to see the perspective from another side. I mean, her map showing the way the Russians view the world and the threats is just so terribly important, because we don't see that. We only see it from our own perspective, and I think that can be terrifically helpful for thinking about relationships. I'm sure that's true at all levels of relationships, but also at the international level. So I just want to thank her for that. It really found it very, very helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Amy.
Oh, nope, sorry.
Okay. So who else would like to speak up with a question or comment?
I have a question.
Maren McClelland, president of our Rotaract organization at IU. Yes.
Hi, I'm a sophomore at Hamilton Luger, and my interest is specifically in China and international studies. And I'm curious to know how Russia thinks about China entering into Europe, specifically with the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm writing a research paper on China's influence in Italy, but I would be interested to hear what Russia thinks about that.
So I think that Russia feels threatened, not just by the European Union, but also by China, especially China entering into their space. And so I was in Central Asia about just under 10 years ago, when we really saw the initial startup of the Belt and Road with their new current president, Xi Jinping, in 2012, where they were investing into those Central Asian countries. But the problem was they were setting up production sites, but they were putting in all their own citizens to work at those sites and completely extracting all of the resources and everything and taking it back to China. So there was actually no benefit for the trade and cooperation that you would otherwise see within Central Asia. And Russia saw that occurring in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan in particular. And so they see it even more threatening when they continue to expand into Europe. They have a lot of messaging that they try to portray and working in that relationship, in particular with, to counter the European Union, where they show, oh, we signed these gas transit deals, we're trying to increase our trade. They've even done some military cooperation as far as their recent training and exercise initiatives, but we've seen it really minimal, and that we've also seen that China continues to maintain the upper hand against Russia in those relationships. And Russia knows that. It's just they try to take advantage of that and exposing the advantage and trying to countering that with the West.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Great question, Maren.
Yes, I have a question. Charlotte?
Yes.
Yes. My question is, what about Africa and South America? Are both Russia and China working their way into those continents as well?
Yes. In particular, we've seen Russia trying to exploit the unrest in those countries and trying to provide protection and support to the authoritarian leaders in power, as well as trying to supply, increase their arms into Africa in particular, and then offering some of their, trading for security provider. And then in particular, we've seen China as well developing, just like we saw in Kazakhstan, where they develop, a production site or some sort of industry, but then they provide the people as well as take all the resources with them back to China.
Is that happening in South America as well?
We've seen some, in particular in Venezuela, where there was a lot of chaos. And we've seen Russia trying to reach into that area, and that provides a lot of concern for the U.S. in particular in that region.
I would think so. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
May I ask one? This is Owen.
Oh, watch out for Owen.
How does the U.S. military deal with the Russian efforts in their troll factories and the creation of fake news?
It's difficult because you can't, it's difficult to stay ahead of it and trying to counter the propaganda machine. I think what we need to continue to is acknowledge that it's there and show examples, especially within the Russian-speaking populations of Europe, as well as what we've seen in other European countries and in the US, that a lot of the stories, there is false information. It's not true. It is being funded and directed by the Kremlin or certain agents of the Kremlin, I think is our best opportunity. It's hard to counter it all. Cyber capability, I'm not an expert on it. I've worked a little bit in the domain, but there is a lot that you have to be very careful about it becoming a slippery slope. It looks like Charlotte's talking, but I can't hear her.
Charlotte is muted right now.
Too bad. Okay, here I come. I just wanted to say I find it reassuring to know that the U.S. Army is training people as well as they're training you. I think that's very comforting, frankly.
Amen.
Yeah, and I do want to, say that I am very fortunate that the Army in particular, they do invest in us at each level of my development, prior to taking command, prior to transitioning to any significant assignment. They do invest in our development. They challenge us in several ways. And I think it is a testament to what they are dedicated into our leadership in leading the enterprise overall with the Army.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Angela, would you say that the military in general has more of an effort, more of a priority for helping to educate the public? Is that something that's a thing now?
Yeah, I think we obviously can do better, and we should do better. In particular, that's why they send us out. So of the War College population, for example, this year, and each year, they have about just under 400 colonels, lieutenant colonels that go to the War College in particular. And of that, 70 of us they selected and they send out into these other fellowship assignments. So as compared to going to Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania, where most of my peers are, they selected several of us to go to different universities, to go to different think tanks and some other agencies. And it is our opportunity. So just as much as I value from it, I hope to give back in that talking with other individuals, letting them know what the Army is doing. And I think it's very beneficial. And in particular, you know, I've been stationed in DC, but I have absolutely valued my year here in Bloomington, just even reconnecting with what is important to business owners, small business owners, what is important to even just the young students here at Indiana University. I engage, you know, every day at Hamilton Luger and in some other classes with, you know, our 20-year-olds who are really going to, you know, become our workforce in the next, you know, 10 years, and seeing what is their education, what's important to them, and sharing with them my experience. And so I value it, and I hope the Army, I think that's why the Army does it as well.
Well, please let your superiors know that we certainly value it. We're tremendously appreciative, and I know that Rotary clubs all over, you know, would love to have visits with this kind of a, you know, little security briefing to help explain what's going on.
Yes.
It's a mystery out there. No, go ahead, Owen.
Spasiba. Очень спасибо.
Okay, means bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Angela.
everyone.
That was very
And so-
interesting.
Yes.
Great. So to leave the meeting, just go to the lower right where it says leave meeting. And click
Right,
on
where it
that.
says leave the meeting.
Angela, it's so great to see you again.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. I hope this was of value, and I appreciate any feedback.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. We're going to stop the recording now. Is that okay, Eric?
Yes,
Yep.
thank you.
So do you want to leave the meeting?
Yep.